There were 3 chairs left empty at the long table nearest the windows, and Sylvie Ashton had been counting them since the soup course. The one directly to her left had belonged to her mother's cousin Bertrand, who had called that morning with a chest cold he had been cultivating since February, and which had finally, at the most convenient possible moment, become a reason not to drive from Sudbury. The one at the far end had been added by the venue coordinator at her brother's request, because Owen had a habit of adding chairs for people he intended to invite, and then forgetting to invite them. And the third one, the one closest to the window, angled slightly away from the table, as though whoever had set it there had not been entirely certain it belonged. That chair had been meant for Patrick, who had sent a text at 4:30 that said something came up. You understand, right? And had not, in the 3 hours since, sent anything further. Sylvie understood. She had been understanding things Patrick said for 2.5 years, and she was very good at it by now. The dinner was her brother Owen's engagement celebration, held at the Harrow House Hotel in the Niagara Peninsula wine country. Because Owen's fiancée, Jess, had grown up 20 minutes away and had always wanted to hold a party here, and because Owen, who had not always been the kind of man who paid attention to what the people around him wanted, had in the last year become exactly that kind of man. Sylvie had watched it happen. She had thought, in the private way she thought things she did not say out loud to anyone, that it was one of the more hopeful things she had witnessed in recent memory. The wine was very good. The room smelled of cedar and something faintly floral. Outside the long windows, the escarpment was going gold in the early evening light, the kind of gold that appeared for exactly 11 minutes in late September and then was gone. Sylvie was a furniture conservator. She spent her working days with her hands inside the past, stripping back layers of paint from Edwardian dressing tables, matching grain on a Victorian sideboard someone's grandmother had kept in a basement for 40 years. She was good at looking at things without anyone noticing she was looking. She was very good at sitting still. She was sitting still now, with her wine glass and the chair that had been meant for Patrick, and watching Owen across the room, with his hand on Jess's shoulder and his whole face, doing something it had not known how to do 3 years ago. The band in the corner finished a slow number. The lead singer stepped back from the microphone. The cellist, there was a cellist, which had surprised Sylvie when she arrived and which she had immediately appreciated, set her bow on her knee and turned a page. And then the cellist set her bow to the string again and played the first 4 bars of Fauré's Après un rêve, and Sylvie's hands went very still on the table, because her grandmother had played that piece on the piano in the back room of the house in Timmins every Sunday evening for as long as Sylvie could remember, and Sylvie had not been able to listen to it since the funeral. She kept her eyes on the window. The gold was still there. She counted it. She heard the chair to her left, the empty one, not Patrick's, the cousin from Sudbury's, scrape very slightly against the floor, and then a man's voice said, quietly enough that it did not carry to the next table, "There seem to be more empty seats at this end of the room than the other. I hope I'm not interrupting anything that requires one of them." Sylvie turned. He was standing at the edge of the table, with one hand resting lightly on the back of Bertrand's chair, not quite pulling it out, not quite leaving it alone. He was perhaps 40, or perhaps a few years younger. The kind of face that was difficult to date because it had clearly been paying careful attention to things for a long time, and that kind of attention left a mark that was not quite age. He wore a dark jacket, open at the collar. His shoes were good in the way that shoes were good when someone wore them every day rather than when they wanted to appear as though they wore them every day. There was a slight asymmetry to his jawline, the kind that came from having broken something once and had it set in a hurry. "The chair is empty," Sylvie said. She had meant it to come out neutrally, and it did. "May I?" he said, which was a more careful thing to ask than simply sitting. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back, not with the hopeful, slightly pressurized expression of a man who had decided she was interesting and wanted her to know it, but with the straightforward attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know whether sitting would be an intrusion. "Yes," she said. He sat. He did not introduce himself immediately. He poured a small amount of water from the carafe on the table and set the glass at an angle that was slightly more parallel to the edge of the table than it had been before. And Sylvie, who spent her days adjusting the alignment of small things, noticed this and said nothing about it. The cellist moved through the Fauré. Sylvie kept her eyes on the window until the piece was done. "You knew that piece," the man said. It was not a question. "My grandmother played it," she said, which was more than she had intended to say. He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet had the particular quality of someone who understood that they had just been given something and were deciding whether to hold it carefully or set it down. "I'm sorry if having it played was difficult," he said. "I didn't arrange the music," Sylvie said. "My brother did. He doesn't know." "Ah," the man said, and then, "He looks happy." She followed his gaze to Owen and Jess, who had moved to the small cleared space near the band and were attempting something that was technically a waltz and practically just the two of them turning slowly in each other's direction. "He is," she said. "It's recent. The happiness or the engagement. Both." She picked up her wineglass and did not drink. "Is there a difference?" The man considered this with more seriousness than the question probably warranted. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes people get engaged and then they figure out the happiness part. Sometimes it's the other way. The ones who have it in the right order are easier to watch." Sylvie looked at him. He was watching Owen and Jess with the expression of a person who had thought about this before and found it genuinely interesting rather than melancholy. "You're not a guest," she said. It was not an accusation. It was the thing she had been quietly assembling since he sat down, the way he had looked at the room when he came in, the small automatic assessment, the absence of a name tag or a drink from the bar. He glanced at her. There was something in the corner of his expression that was not quite a smile. "I work at the hotel," he said. "I didn't realize the staff sat in on the parties." "We don't, as a rule," he said. "I was doing a walkthrough. The private dining room on this floor gets checked on Saturday evenings." He paused. "I noticed there were several empty chairs here. One of them," Sylvie said carefully, "was for someone who sent a text at 4:30. "Ah," he said again. And then, after a moment, "I'm sorry, are you?" "For the text," he said, "not for the chair being empty." Sylvie looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very precise thing to be sorry about." "I try," he said, and the not-quite smile came back, and she found, unexpectedly, that she was not uncomfortable. The band moved into something older, a standard she didn't know. The gold outside the window was gone now, replaced by the blue that came after, which was less dramatic and in some ways more beautiful. Across the room, Owen's mother, Sylvie's stepmother Janet, sensible blazer, sensible earrings, the particular expression she wore when she was deciding to enjoy herself as a matter of personal discipline, was talking to Jess's father with the animated concentration of a woman who had been making conversation at events like this for 30 years, and had decided somewhere along the way to get good at it. "My name is Sylvie," she said. She didn't know why she said it. It seemed, in the absence of anything else to offer, like the honest thing. "Ronan," he said. "Ronan Holt. Do you live in the area, Ronan Holt, or do you only work in it?" "Both," he said. "I grew up 40 minutes east. I came back about 6 years ago." He turned the water glass a quarter-inch on the table, then back. "You're from Timmins." She looked at him. "Your grandmother played Fauré," he said. "And Timmins was the first place I thought of when you said it. That's a very specific association." "My mother is from there," he said. "I spent summers. There's a particular way the women there talk about music, very matter-of-fact, like it's furniture. Like, of course, there's a piano, of course, there's Fauré." Sylvie felt something shift very slightly in her chest, the way a drawer shifted when you found the right angle and it finally slid open. She had never heard anyone describe Timmins that way. She had never heard anyone describe her grandmother's relationship to music in terms she recognized as accurate. "She died in March," Sylvie said. "My grandmother." "I know this is the inadequate thing to say," Ronan Holt said, "but I'm sorry." "It's not inadequate," she said. "It's the only true thing. Everyone else says she had a good long life, and she did, and it doesn't help." He was quiet. He did not reach for a more useful thing to say. He simply let the sentence be what it was, and Sylvie, who had been in rooms for 6 months, where everyone wanted to put her grief somewhere more manageable, sat with the unusual relief of a person who was not being asked to make their sadness smaller. The cellist played something new, something Sylvie didn't know. Outside, the last of the blue had settled into dark. After a while, Ronan Holt said, "Is there anything I can bring you from the bar? The red they're pouring tonight is from a vineyard 2 kilometers from here. It's better than the one on the table." "No," she said. "Thank you." He inclined his head. He stood. He pushed Bertrand's chair in carefully. Before he turned away, he looked at her once, directly, and said, "I'm glad the chair was empty." She did not know what to say to that, so she said the only thing that was true, which was, "So am I." He crossed the room and went through a staff door near the far wall, and Sylvie sat with the Fauré still somewhere at the back of her throat, and the wine she hadn't drunk, and the chair that no longer felt like an absence. Owen, because Owen was now the kind of man who noticed things, found her by the window at the end of the evening, and said, with the particular careful tone he used when he was not going to ask a question directly, The fellow who sat with you for a bit, that was Holt. He said his name was Ronan Holt. He didn't say what he does here. He said he works in the hotel. Owen made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He owns it, Syl. Sylvie set her glass down. He said he was doing a walkthrough. He does do walkthroughs. He does everything. He bought their place 8 years ago when it was derelict. It had been closed for 12 years, the whole property, the orchard included, and he restored it himself, or mostly himself. He consulted. Owen paused. He's very private about it. Half the people who come here don't know who he is. He likes it that way. Sylvie looked at the staff door. He restored it, she said. Down to the original cedar on the ceiling. He found archive photographs. Owen looked at her with the new, careful attention he had acquired in the last year. I thought you'd want to know. She thought about the way he had adjusted the water glass. She thought about the way he had looked at the room when he came in. Not like a guest arriving, not like staff on duty, but like a person checking on something they loved and wanted to find in good order. She did not, that night, look up his name. She had to go back to the hotel 2 days later, because she had left her grandmother's brooch in the bathroom of the room where the family had gathered before the party. It was a small thing, a sprig of forget-me-nots in silver and enamel, made in Montreal in the 1940s, and Sylvie's mother had given it to her the previous Christmas with the particular offhand manner she used when giving things that mattered enormously. And Sylvie had pinned it to her cardigan for the dinner, and then, somewhere in the evening, unpinned it because the cardigan had been too warm and set it on the shelf above the sink and driven home without it. The hotel, on a Monday morning in late September, was a different place than it had been on Saturday evening. The light came differently through the long windows, cooler, more considered. 2 men were replacing a section of baseboard in the corridor near the elevator. A woman in a Harrow house jacket was arranging flowers at the check-in desk with the focus of someone for whom this was a serious undertaking. The woman at the desk called housekeeping. Housekeeping confirmed the brooch had been found and set aside. Sylvie was led down a short corridor to a small sitting room, which was the kind of room that old hotels had when they had been built by people who understood that guests sometimes needed a place to be alone without being in their own room, and the brooch was in a small white envelope on the table. Sylvie thanked the housekeeper. She put the envelope in her bag. She went back through the corridor. At the turn near the orchard side exit, she nearly walked into a man who was crouching beside the baseboard, running his thumb along the seam between the new section and the old. He looked up. Oh, Sylvie said. Hello. Ronan Holt stood. He was in work clothes, dark trousers, a worn canvas jacket with paint on the cuff. He had a small level in his hand. He did not look like the owner of anything. He looked like a man who had been in this corridor for several hours and was not finished yet. You came back, he said. I left something. It was found. He waited, which was a way of asking without asking. My grandmother's brooch, she said. She touched her bag. I'd left it in the bathroom on Saturday. Good that it was found, he said. There was a pause. The 2 men down the corridor were talking quietly about something. One of them laughed. My brother told me, Sylvie said, about the hotel. Ronan Holt looked at her. His expression did not change in a way she could describe, but something in it became more careful. He told you I own it, he said. He told you restored it, she said. From photographs. Something in his face did the thing that faces did when a person had been described in many ways and had finally been described in the one that was accurate. There were archive photographs from 1924 and 1961, he said. The cedar on the ceiling was documented in both. The 1961 ones were better. Someone had been in with a proper camera. He paused. It took 4 years. The orchard was the hardest part. The trees were still there, but they'd been left too long, and the first arborist I hired told me to take half of them down. A small pause. I got a second opinion. The orchard looks well, Sylvie said. It had a good year, he said, with the straightforward satisfaction of someone talking about something they had watched through a long uncertainty and were only recently allowed to feel good about. She stood in the corridor with her bag and her grandmother's brooch and thought about the word restored and what it meant when a person applied it to a building that had been closed for 12 years and trusted, on the basis of archive photographs, that it was worth bringing back. I should let you get back to the baseboard, she said. The seam is lifting, he said. The new section isn't breathing the same as the original, different wood source. I should have caught it earlier. You can see it from here, she said, because she had been looking at wood long enough to see the same thing he had been crouching over. He looked at her. You can see it from here, he said. I'm a furniture conservator, she said. It's a professional liability. And Ronan Holt, who had not smiled yet in the way that people smiled when they decided they liked something, smiled then, briefly and privately and very much without intending to. "I don't normally tell people I own the hotel," he said. "When I'm here working, I find it changes the conversation." "Into what?" "Into a conversation about the hotel," he said, "rather than about the baseboard, or the orchard, or whether someone's grandmother played Fauré." Sylvie looked at him. She said, "That seems like a reasonable thing to want to avoid." He looked at her for a moment in the corridor, with the level in his hand and the paint on his cuff, and said, "If you're driving back through town, the bakery on Wellington makes a coffee that's better than what we have here. That's not something I'd normally admit about a property I own." "I noticed the coffee," Sylvie said. "I'm working on it," he said. She almost smiled. It felt in the corridor with the lifted seam and the early light, like something that cost more than a smile usually cost, and was worth it. "Goodbye, Ronan Holt," she said. "Goodbye, Sylvie." He did not add a last name because she hadn't given one, and the not adding of it was its own kind of attention. She went back through the lobby and out into the September morning, and drove through town and stopped at the bakery on Wellington and had a coffee that was in fact considerably better than the one at the hotel. 3 weeks went by. She restored an 1880s escritoire for a client in Hamilton and drove twice to Burlington to look at a walnut breakfront that turned out to be a very competent 1940s reproduction, which she told the owner as gently as she could, and which the owner did not find as interesting as Sylvie did. She had dinner with Owen and Jess on a Thursday and watched them navigate a disagreement about whether to get a dog with the particular patience of 2 people who had decided that the disagreement was not the point. She did not drive past the Niagara Peninsula. She did not look up Ronan Holt's name. She did think, in the private way she thought things, about a man crouching beside a lifted seam at 8 in the morning on a Monday because it was bothering him. A letter arrived on a Tuesday, addressed in handwriting that was even and slightly compressed, the handwriting of someone who had learned to write carefully in a small space. "Sylvie, I hope you don't object to the first name. Owen gave me the address when I asked, and I asked him before I let myself think about whether I should. The baseboard is fixed. I used a reclaimed section from a room we don't rent out, closer to the original growth, better match. I don't know why I thought you would want to know that, except that you could see it from 6 feet away. There is, if you're ever in the area, a section of original 1924 wainscoting in the East Corridor that I don't think anyone else has ever looked at the way I think you would look at it. I am aware this is a very unusual thing to invite someone to come and see." Sylvie read it twice. She set it on the kitchen table and made tea and came back and read it again. Then she got out the pale grey notepaper she used for client correspondence and wrote back. "R.H. You were right about the bakery on Wellington. The wainscoting sounds worth seeing. I'll be in the area the second weekend of October. If the East Corridor is accessible at a reasonable hour, I'll find you there." Sjesh found him in the East Corridor at 9:30 on a Saturday morning with a torch and a small notebook. He was not expecting anyone else to care about the wainscoting, she could tell, because he looked up when she came around the corner, with the expression of a person who had been absorbed in something private, and was startled in a way that was not unpleasant. "You came," he said. "You invited me to look at wainscoting," she said. "I take wainscoting seriously." "I know," he said, and meant it. The wainscoting was extraordinary. It was the original white oak, installed when the house was built, and it had been painted over 6 times, and then stripped back at some point in the 1980s badly enough that a lesser restorer would have given up on it. But the grain was there, still doing what grain did when you gave it light and attention, and someone, Sylvie suspected she knew who, had stripped it back again properly and brought it to a finish that did not try to hide what had happened to it. "You left the marks," she said. She ran her thumb along a section where the surface had been damaged and repaired, the repair left visible. "The marks are part of what it is," he said. He was standing beside her, close enough that she could see where he was looking, which was at the same place she was looking. "Hiding them would have been a lie, and the wood knows the difference." She looked at him. "The wood knows the difference," she said. "My grandmother said it," he said without embarrassment. She was from the Gaspésie. She refinished furniture as not a hobby, more of a compulsion. She said you could feel when a piece had been treated honestly. She was right, Sylvie said. They stood in the East Corridor for 40 minutes and talked about the wainscoting, and then about the ceiling in the room at the end of the hall, and then about the original hardware, and then about a reproduction doorknob that he had installed 4 years ago and had hated ever since and was waiting to find the right replacement for. He made coffee, not from the hotel kitchen, from a small machine in a room off the back corridor that was clearly where the actual work of the hotel got done. Plain table, site drawings, a coat hanging on a hook. The coffee was good. "This is better than the coffee in the restaurant," she said. "Significantly," he said. "I'm still working on the procurement." She looked at the site drawings on the table. They were hand-done, the kind of drawings people made before software made them unnecessary. And some people kept making because the thinking happened in the line. She did not ask to look at them more closely, though she wanted to. "How long has it been open?" she said. 4 years this November, he said. "We had a soft opening in the spring and then a proper one in the fall. The orchard had its first real harvest that October." He set his cup down. "I had grown up being told the property was unsalvageable. The family that owned it before had tried twice in the 90s and walked away. I bought it because I didn't believe them." "Did you know you were right?" He thought about this. "No," he said. "I thought there was enough of the original material to work with, and I thought it was worth being wrong about if I was wrong. But I didn't know." "You've said original 3 times," she said. "That's not how most people talk about buildings. Most people talk about square footage and load-bearing walls," he said. "I talk about what the building was trying to be before someone stopped listening to it." Sylvie set her coffee down. She said, "That's very close to how I talk about furniture." And he looked at her in the plain back room with the site drawings and the better coffee and said, "I know, I looked you up." There was a pause. It was not an uncomfortable pause. "After Owen's dinner," she said. 2 days after," he said. "After you came back for the brooch." He looked at the table, then back at her. "I read an essay you published in the Canadian Furniture Review about a Confederation-era sideboard in Kingston. You wrote about the marks the original maker left inside the drawer. Not the finish, but the tool marks. You said they were a kind of signature that wasn't meant to be seen." "And?" Sylvie said. "And I thought," he said slowly, "that I had been saying approximately the same thing about this building for 8 years, and had not yet met anyone who would have noticed the drawer." Sylvie looked at him for a long moment. The corridor was quiet. Outside, through the window at the end of the hall, the orchard was the deep color it went in October when the harvest was in, and the trees had finished their work for the year. "That is," she said carefully, "a very particular thing to have thought." "Yes," he said. "I'm aware." She did not say anything else. She picked up her coffee and finished it. He did not press for a response, and the not pressing was, she thought, characteristic of him. Before she left, she stood for a moment at the turn in the corridor where she had nearly walked into him 3 weeks before, and she said, "The replacement for the doorknob. I have a client in Stratford who deals in salvage hardware, 19th century mostly. I can send you his information if you'd like." "I'd like," Ronan said. "All right," she said, and went out into the October morning. She sent the contact information. Her client in Stratford wrote to Ronan Holt. Ronan Holt wrote back to Sylvie to say he had found a match. Sylvie wrote back to ask about the orchard. He wrote to her twice a week, always short, always about something specific. A section of flagstone in the side garden that had heaved over the summer, a new pastry chef who approached croissants as though they were a personal reckoning, a guest who had asked for a room with no view and had been genuinely upset when the room turned out to have a very good one. She wrote back. She wrote more than she had intended to. Owen, over dinner in November, said in the careful indirect way he had been using since September, "Jess thinks you seem different." "Different how? More like yourself," he said. "She's known you 3 years and she says she thinks she's only recently meeting you." Sylvie thought about this. "Tell Jess she's very perceptive." Owen looked at her over the table. "Is it the fellow from the hotel?" "I've been writing to him," she said, "about salvage hardware and pastry philosophy." Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's a private person, Syl. He's had some difficult years. The family situation when he bought the hotel it was complicated. There's a board, technically. His father established it before he died. And there are people on it who have opinions about how the hotel should be run that are not Ronan's opinions." "The kind," Owen said, "that involve making money faster than he wants to make it. And a partnership, potentially, with a resort group that would change what the hotel is." He looked at her. "I'm not telling you this for any particular reason, just so you know what you're writing into." She thought about the site drawings on the plain table. She thought about what the building was trying to be before someone stopped listening to it. "Thank you," she said. She went home and did not that night write to Ronan. She wrote the next morning. She did not mention what Owen had said. She wrote about a Queen Anne highboy she had been working on for 2 weeks, the drawer handles which were not original, but had been on the piece long enough that removing them felt dishonest. She asked him, because she thought he would have a view, whether a thing could be original enough. He wrote back that evening. He said, "I think the question is whether the later thing was added with attention or without. Handles put on carelessly are noise. Handles someone chose because they fit the piece, even if they weren't the first choice. Those are part of the conversation. The piece is still talking. You just have to know how to listen to what it's saying now." She read the letter at the kitchen table with the brooch sitting on the windowsill, where she had put it when she got it back, and she thought about conversations that had been interrupted and resumed, and about things that were not the first choice, but were the right one. In December, he drove to Hamilton. She had not asked him to. He arrived at her workshop at 10 on a Saturday morning with a paper bag from a bakery she didn't know, and knocked on the door with the same careful knock he used on the doors of the rooms in the hotel. She suspected, not demanding, but certain. She let him in. The workshop was where she spent most of her time, and she had not had many people in it. It smelled of linseed oil and beeswax, and faintly, the particular wood smell of things that had been kept closed for a long time and were breathing again. There were 3 pieces on the work tables: the Queen Anne highboy, a small Canadian blanket chest in butternut, and a set of dining chairs whose joinery she had been redoing for a month. Ronan stood in the middle of the room and looked at the chairs and then at the highboy, and then he walked to the highboy and looked at the handles. He did not touch anything. "These are the ones you wrote about," he said. "Yes." He looked at them for a long moment. "They belong," he said. "They're not trying to be something else." "That's what I thought," she said, "but I wanted a second opinion." He turned from the highboy and looked at her, and there was in his face the same quality she had noticed in the corridor at the hotel. The careful, honest attention of someone who was not performing anything. It was very quiet in the workshop. Outside, the December Street was doing what December Streets did. "The board met last week," he said. It was not a non sequitur, she understood, though it arrived like one. "They've pushed the partnership proposal again. The resort group. It would mean changes to the hotel that I won't agree to." He set the paper bag from the bakery on her work table, carefully, away from the wood. "My father built the board to protect the property. He did not build it to redirect the property. I've been saying this for 3 years. I'm saying it again next month at a formal review." He paused. "I wanted you to know, because you asked what you were writing into." "Owen told me," she said. "I didn't say he had." "I know you didn't say," he said. "I've been waiting for you to say. When you didn't, I thought I should." Sylvie looked at him across the workshop, with the highboy and the butternut chest and the chairs between them, and thought, "This is a person who has been honest with the materials he works with for so long that he doesn't know how to be otherwise." "What will happen?" she said. "I'll win," he said. "Or I won't, and I'll take the hotel private and tell the board to consider their association concluded. I've been building toward the second option for 2 years in case." He said it quietly and without drama. "The hotel is mine. It was always going to be mine to decide. The board is a formality my father thought was a kindness, and it was, and it is no longer." There was a long pause. "The chairs," Sylvie said. "The joinery on the back legs was done with hide glue originally. I had to find a source for the right grade of it. It took 6 weeks. Ronan looked at the chairs. 6 weeks, he said. "Some things take as long as they take," she said. "If you hurry them, the joint fails." He looked at her. He understood what she was saying. She could tell, because he was someone who said things about wood that meant other things, and so was she. "All right," he said. She made coffee. He opened the paper bag from the bakery, which contained 2 croissants, and she said, "Your pastry chef." And he said, "Not yet. She's close. This is from a place on the way here." They ate the croissants at the corner of the work table and talked about the blanket chest in butternut and whether the original iron hinges could be saved, and he had a view, and it was a good view, and she told him so. Before he left, he stood at the door of the workshop in his coat and said, "I'd like to come back to see the chairs when they're finished." "They'll be finished in February," she said. "February," he said. "All right." He went out into the December Street. She stood in the doorway of the workshop and felt the cold come in and did not immediately close the door. He came back in February. He came back in March as well, because by then there was not a particular reason required. The board meeting had gone the way he'd said it would go. She had followed it at a careful distance, through the one sentence he sent her the morning after. "The hotel is still the hotel." She had written back one sentence, "Good." In April, she drove to the peninsula for a consult on a Victorian oak sideboard. A client near Vineland wanted assessed, and afterwards she stopped at Harrow House because it was 4 blocks from the client's house, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Henry was at the front desk, Ronan's front desk manager, who had been in hotel work since before the property had been restored, and who addressed her as Miss, Ashton with the particular warmth of a person who had decided she was worth the formality. Ronan was in the East Corridor, the contractor. She waited. He came out and saw her and said, "You're in the area." And she said, "Vineland sideboard consult." And he said, "How was it?" And she said, "Good bones, bad decisions in the 1970s, salvageable." And he laughed, briefly, the kind of laugh that was private and cost something. They walked through the orchard, which was just beginning. The trees had the particular stubborn look of things that had been counted out and had declined to agree. She told him about the sideboard. He told her about a water issue in the foundation on the north side that had turned out to be less serious than feared. They walked the whole length of the orchard and back, and at the gate she said she should get back on the road, and he said, "Of course." And they stood at the gate for a moment with the April light coming through the trees. "I have 2 tickets to the Fauré concert at Kerner Hall in May," he said. "String quartet. I bought them in January. I thought, and then I didn't know if it was the right thing to bring it up." Sylvie looked at him. "The Fauré at Owen's dinner," she said. "Yes, you bought the tickets in January." "I bought them in January," he said. She thought about a man in January buying 2 tickets to a Fauré concert. She thought about what it meant to hold something for 4 months, because you were not certain it was the right thing to offer. "It's the right thing," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and she could see the relief move through him simply, without his trying to conceal it, which she thought was one of the more honest things she had seen a person do. "All right," he said. "May then." She drove back to Hamilton with the April light on the escarpment and the small enamel forget-me not brooch pinned to her jacket because she had taken to wearing it again in October and had not stopped. And she did not press her thumbnail into her finger or count things or make herself smaller than she was. She had been very good for a very long time at sitting still. She thought it might be time, now, to move.